want to write music in the major key, that does not mean you have to only use the 7 notes of a major scale. The major key is actually a big fun party, and lots of weird funky characters are invited to that party that don't come from the major scale. Chords like this, which we call the 5 of 6 or the major 3. I'm going to explain what both of those mean, but more importantly, we're going to learn what this chord feels like, what it sounds like, and how easily we can start using it in our own songs. But after that, I do want to drill down and analyze this chord more deeply to understand why it sounds so good, because that will unlock some interesting music theory territory, like a scale that nobody talks about, but I think is very practical. And then lastly, we will take all these concepts and actually make some real music with them. So let's get the basics out of the way first. This is the C major scale, and with all of those notes, we can build these triads. And we write those out with these Roman numerals. If you don't know how all that stuff works, please watch my free music theory playlist on my website. And these are the 7 characters that normally show up to the C major party, right? These chords right here. The new chord that we're inviting in through the door is going to be found here. Let's go to the 3rd scale degree, which is E, C, D, E. And normally E gets a minor chord, but instead we're going to give it a major chord instead. And this is out of key because now all of a sudden, with an E major, we have this G sharp note playing, right? G sharp doesn't belong in the C major scale. Now, once you've found this major 3 chord, what I'd like you to try doing is moving it to the 4 chord. The 4 chord is a perfect way to follow up that chord. So we could do something like C major to E major to F major, and then maybe G afterward. Now we have a 4 chord loop, C, E, F to G. Wonderful 4 chord loop, perfect for a pop song, perfect for a rock song, depending on how you play it. But there's another great option. Instead of moving to the 4 chord, what if you take this E major and you switch to our 6 chord right afterward? Do you hear how nice that sounds? And once again, we could follow that up with anything. We could follow it up with the 5 chord. We could follow it up with the 4 chord. And pretty much whatever we do, we're going to get a nice sounding chord progression. So this chord moves to 4 or it moves to 6. But I also want you to think about those motions in reverse. You might find a way to get to this E major by first playing an F. Take a listen. Here's an F. And hear how it kind of pulls down to that E. So don't be afraid to try these same motions in reverse. Or playing an A minor and then an E and then to F. Either way, I want you to think about this new chord, this major 3 chord, as easily working with the 4 or easily working with the 6. And honestly, I do think that that's enough to start using this chord. You don't have to understand exactly why it works or where it comes from or anything like that. Just try using these motions in your own song in different major keys to see what it sounds like. And to give you some inspiration, here's some examples of where you've heard this chord before. Starting first with Santeria by Sublime. That song is in the key of E major, and it starts on an E major chord. Then we go to this chord that we're working with, the major 3. So we go up to the 3rd scale degree, 1, 2, 3. That's going to be G sharp, and we play a major chord. In that case, they move to the 6th chord of E major, which is C sharp minor, and then D. So you've got that exact same motion we just talked about of the 3 chord moving to the 6th chord. Or let's go back to the C major scale, and let's go back a few decades, and we get Roy Orbison. Anything you want, you got it. Once again, moving from this 3 chord to the 6 chord. But you can hear that 3 chord moving straight to the 4 chord in songs like Creep by Radiohead. That's in the key of G, and it starts on a G major chord. What's scale degree 3 in G major? 1, 2, 3, that's B major. That's the next chord that's played. From there, they scoot right over to the 4 chord, C major. And then they do that wonderful trick of the borrowed 4 chord, which I've discussed many times on this channel. Once you've listened to that, I want you to listen to The Air We Breathe by the Hollies, because then you'll get a good idea of where Radiohead got the idea for Creep. And lastly, my favorite example of this being used is by the Blues Travelers in their song Hook. They basically took the canon and D chord progression, which is completely diatonic. It stays completely in the key of D, and they just ripped that off, except they changed every instance of the 3 chord, which should be B minor. I'm sorry, F sharp minor. That should be the 3 chord. They just made it F sharp major instead. And then they continued on with that chord progression. And that's enough variation to really add some energy and rock and bluesiness to that chord progression. Now, in all of the instances we just discussed, it's really important to know that you might see this chord show up like this chord as a dominant 7th chord instead. And that doesn't change anything, really. So in the key of C, for example, if I decide to play E7 instead of E major, all I've done is I've added a D to the chord. and D was already in the scale to begin with. So this really doesn't change the game at all. It does enhance the flavor of this chord a little bit. It gives it some more drama, some more spice, some more flavor, and that might be what you want, but that also might not be what you want, depending on the genre. You might just want something more straightforward with the major chord, or you might want something a little funkier, and that's where the dominant 7th chord comes in helpful. So that's the very, very basics of it, but I do think it's going to be very helpful to dive a little deeper to try to figure out why these chord changes sound so good. First, let's just take a listen to this change from C major to E major to F major. So this change from the 3 to the 4. Well, the 3 and the 4 are just a half step away from one another. And one of the cool tricks in music is the chromatic approach chord. This is the idea that you can get to any chord you want just by starting by its chromatic neighbor, right? So here's C major. What are the chromatic neighbors to C major? And that just means what are the notes right next to it? Well, I could move down a half step and I'd get a B major, and that chromatic neighbor does bump me back up to C. Just like the other chromatic neighbor, C sharp, bumps me back down to C. So this is a fun way to approach a chord. You approach a chord through its chromatic neighbor. And your ear likes this. Your ear knows, hey, this is where I'm supposed to be. Everything's off by 1, and then it clicks back into place. It's like your brain's doing that thing where you want to adjust a painting because it's a little off balance. You want to fix that. And when you hear this chord, your brain wants to fix it, and then we fix it and we get that satisfaction. And this doesn't just work on the tonic, this works on the 4 chord as well. We could start from the chromatic neighbor of the 4 chord, just like we've been doing, moving from E to F. Or in reverse, F sharp to F. And then we can use that also to approach our 5 chord. Here's F, F sharp, pulling me to G. And then we could even start on the other side of G and move our way down. Right? So you hear all those chromatic motions are very messy on music page because you're going to have all these sharps and flats, but they sound just fine to us. They pull us to those chords. So I think that's the easiest way to explain why E moves so well to F. It's just a chromatic approach chord. But more importantly is why does E move so well to A minor? And hopefully you already know this, but I still want to recap it because we're going to be thinking about things a little differently. We were just in the key of C major, which uses these notes and chords. Let's take those same notes and chords, but just reorder them to the key of A minor. Same exact notes, same exact chords. But you should know that when you're composing in the key of A minor, it's extremely popular to break the scale and say, nope, I'm not going to work with these 7 notes. I'm going to work with these 7 notes instead. Because those 7 notes, one, they sound awesome. But more importantly, they allow you to build this chord. Access to this G sharp, by taking all of our Gs and making them G sharps instead, we can now build an E major chord. An E major chord is the dominant chord of A minor. It's the most important chord to know when you're composing in A minor, and it's not even in the scale. This E major pulls us extremely well towards A minor. So even though it's not in the scale, we basically think of it as part of the family anyways, and we should expect this big 5 chord leads us to our 1 chord in the key of A minor. So going back to the key of C major, now, if I want to get to A minor, I could just start on its dominant chord. I could start on E major, and that will pull me to my 6th chord. So we call this chord the 5 of 6. It's the dominant chord of A minor. It's the dominant chord of our 6th chord, and it takes us there very well. And just like before, instead of using this set of notes, what I want to do is use a new set of notes that takes all of my Gs and turns them to G sharps. And what that leaves me with is a weird scale called Ionian sharp 5. And it's not a scale you hear discussed very often, but I think it's very important to know for this context right here of using over this specific secondary dominant chord. So if you see the 5 of 6 chord or the 3 chord pop up, it's a very smart idea to play the Ionian sharp 5 scale instead. It'll outline that chord and it won't screw things up. Because you could really screw things up if you play like a G natural on top of this chord. The whole point of this chord is to have a G sharp. If I start playing a G natural on top of it, well now I'm getting the notes of an E major chord and an E minor chord at the same time, and your ear does not want to hear that. So that's a lot of theory, but ultimately this is all about making music. So let's hear what that would sound like. I've written and produced an entire chorus section to a song, and I'm going to briefly walk you through exactly how I did it. But if you're a premium member on my website, or if you signed up to my Patreon, I've posted a very long video that details exactly how I've done it. Every single step of the process, from writing to recording to mixing and processing. Here's the long and short of it though. I wrote the following chord progression that goes from C to E to A minor to F. And then it goes from C to E to F to to B flat. Now B flat is out of key. It's the backdoor chord, which I've talked about in several lessons, most recently in my lesson on famous chords. And once I wrote the chord progression, I recorded 3 different guitar tracks. 2 of those guitar tracks were full chords, just strumming through the chord all the way through. And I took those 2 tracks and I split them into the left speaker and the right speaker. Then I made a 3rd guitar track of just playing the same thing with power chords, and I put that right in the center. So I got this big fat wall of guitars. Of course, I needed drums and bass, so I added those in next. Then I threw a bunch of reverb on an electric guitar, and I started playing octaves on top of those chords. I played octave notes that were notes within the underlying chord. So like over the C major chord, I played an E note. That's in the C major chord. Over the E major chord, I played a B note. That's part of the E major chord. Next, I wrote some lyrics and a vocal melody. But when I was writing my melody, there was a long pause in between what I had written. So I used that little opportunity, that little pocket, to go straight down the C Ionian sharp 5 scale and hopefully give it like a big, iconic hook, something you can really latch onto, a musical part of the chorus that becomes an identity for the chorus itself. No idea how I got here. Then lastly, I let the chord progression continue and I improvised some leads on top, using the exact same principles I taught in my last few lessons on improvising. Except this time I had access to 2 different scales. I had access to the C major scale, and I also had access to the C major with the sharp 5 scale. And putting it all together sounded like this. I had no idea how I got here. There's no time to find my way. Try to bury it behind me, but I know it's almost through. Now you really should know that this notation we've learned, the 5 of 6, this is very important for knowing all of your secondary dominants. And all we did today was explore deeply one secondary dominant. I really do think you should learn the other ones and spend just as much time analyzing them, trying to figure out where can these chords go besides where they're supposed to go. Right? E major is supposed to go to 6, but we've learned, hey, it can also go to 4 as well. And just by experimenting, you'll realize there's other options as well. The only 2 options I gave you aren't the only choices for bringing this chord in. And I also think this lesson proves that it's pretty helpful to know your modes of harmonic minor. When you take the harmonic minor scale and start rotating it in different positions, you get things like this, and they do pop up in all sorts of different places in music. I did do a very fun series on the harmonic minor scale and the modes of it as well, so do check that out. The links are below in the description. But that about does it here for today. If you appreciated this lesson, please thank my Patreon supporters and my premium site members for making these videos possible. If it wasn't for them, I would not be able to make free lessons like this. If you'd like to join them and get access to hundreds of videos that aren't available here on YouTube, and lots of charts, MP3s, and diagrams, there are links below in the description. But if you're not interested in any of that, please like this video, hit that subscribe button. All that sort of stuff really helps me out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.